There's tons of inspirational stories in the Bible, telling tales of heroes, romance, and many more uplifting stuff like that. But every great narrative always has its tragic parts. One of the Bible's most important tragic stories is the story of King Saul. This was a chap who lost everything and went from being the savior and hero in his own story to an annoying villain in someone else's. In this video, I'll go over the life of Saul. I'll talk about his rise and becoming the first king of Israel and how he lost everything, leading to his eventual death. Now, the Israelites had already spent a couple years free from Egypt at this point, and they had also established themselves as a nation after permanently borrowing a bunch of land from the Canaanites. So they were doing fine so far, but the one constant that they had to deal with was not having an actual leader. See, since they already had God on their side, sometimes it felt like they didn't need one because, he's God, but God is also kind of not human, so leading wasn't exactly a smooth process since he isn't there physically and all. Instead, God had to use intermediaries. Firstly, it was Moses and Joshua, then it was later the judges and a few priests. A couple of these leaders were good, but others not so much. But through all of this, the Israelites always had to go up against nations with real leaders and kings, and it showed too. Pretty much every couple years, the Israelites would end up subjugated under one of their enemies and then would need a judge to help them out. They had no stable leadership, so they were always weaker and more vulnerable than their neighbors. And everyone in Israel understood this problem too, so they'd been crying about getting a king of theirs for a while. And this is where Saul comes in. After years of begging for a king, God finally gave in and let Israel have their first one. Saul was the first king of Israel, and boy, when I tell you they made the perfect choice, I mean it, physically speaking at least. See, Saul also just looked like a king right from the start. No, I'm not trying to glaze or anything, because this is literally how he was described in the Bible. It says Saul the son of Kish was a handsome young man, as handsome as anyone in the whole of Israel, and he was a head taller than anyone else. They literally called him tall, dark, and handsome. I just know whoever wrote this was horny as hell. But thankfully for Israel, Saul was more than just his looks. Right off the bat, we see Saul was a very capable leader. Like I mentioned earlier, Israel had no stable leadership, and they also did not have a military. Despite this, Saul was always able to gather the troops necessary to protect Israel's interest. Right after he became king, the Ammonites sieged a city called Jabesh, and they threatened they would gouge out the eyes of everybody in the city. But immediately Saul heard this, he wasn't having none of it. In just a couple days, Saul was able to gather up 330,000 men to help him fight the Ammonites. But by far, Saul's most impressive win was when he beat Israel's biggest enemies, the Philistines. He beat them a couple of times, but you see, the first time they fought, the Israelites did not have any blacksmiths. Instead, they had to rely on Philistine blacksmiths to make any kinds of metal tools. So you'd think it would be a bad time to pick a fight with the Philistines, given they had a bunch of swords and spears, while the Israelite army was made up of men with rusty farm tools and only 2 swords which belonged to Saul and his son Jonathan. But lucky for Israel, Saul was pretty great at picking men for his army. People just like his cousin Abner and his son Jonathan showed this. In this battle, Jonathan and his armor bearer alone took out 20 Philistines themselves with just 1 sword and no backup. With a military like that, it's no surprise he won. Everything was going fine, but while enjoying these conquests, Saul had made some horrible mistakes that basically caused his downfall. Remember that impressive win over the Philistines? Well, the priest Samuel was supposed to burn some offerings to God before the fighting started. But for whatever reason, Samuel was running late, and Saul got nervous seeing the Philistines. So instead of waiting for Samuel to come burn the offerings himself, Saul went ahead and did it. And then in another battle against the Amalekites, Saul was ordered to specifically not let any Amalekite or any of the belongings survive the battle. He was supposed to slaughter everyone and everything completely, but instead, for whatever reason, Saul decided not to kill the Amalekite king. He kept him alive, along with all their cattle and livestock, which he kept as plunder. Through these 2 decisions, Saul had disobeyed God twice, so at this point he was just only on borrowed time. Samuel had completely stopped speaking with him, and God had already chosen his replacement, so it didn't take long for Samuel to anoint someone else. Saul was unaware of this, but at some point Samuel traveled all the way to Bethlehem to anoint David, the son of Jesse, as Saul's replacement to be the next king of Israel. And the second battle against the Philistines would be where David would announce himself to the world. The Philistines came back hungry for revenge, and this time they came with a champion called Goliath. Goliath was a 10-foot tall giant completely clad in bronze armor from head to toe, and he had a huge sword that could behead 6 people with just one swing. So reasonably speaking, the Israelites were fucked. This beast challenged Israel to find anyone who could beat him in a one-on-one fight, and obviously the Israelites struggled to do this. For days, men of Israel, including Saul himself, just stood there in complete fear, all trembling below Goliath's feet. Despite Saul being a Chad in his own right, he couldn't even dream of facing Goliath, and lucky for him, he didn't need to. A young David stepped in, and with just one swing of his sling, he killed Goliath. He then beheaded Goliath and killed many other Philistines. Saul didn't know it then, but his upgrade had just arrived. Saul, on the other hand, was furious. He was the king of Israel, the first one at that, and yet somehow his people loved this peasant kid way more than they ever loved him. Once Saul couldn't handle this anymore, he resorted to petty tactics against David, like throwing spears at him randomly and then purposefully sending him on tough missions so he would fail. But David dodged every spear and still completed every mission successfully. So when Saul couldn't take it anymore, he straight up declared David an enemy of the king, making him a fugitive. Saul was determined to get rid of David, and he did everything in his power to kill him. One time he even threw a spear at his son Jonathan for even trying to defend David. He murdered multiple priests for giving David supplies while he was on the run, and also destroyed entire cities for hiding David from him. The only thing Saul prioritized over David was the Philistines. On some occasions, he abandoned the search for David to deal with the Philistines whenever they tried to invade. Despite all of this though, David had no intention of causing any harm to Saul. While Saul was chasing David, David found Saul off guard on 2 separate occasions and really could have killed him in any one of those times, but instead, he only cut off a piece of his robe and took his spear also. Then later, he showed this to Saul as proof that he had no intention of harming him. You'd think this would be the end of it. And I mean, David had him by the balls literally. One time he caught him taking a piss and still chose not to kill him. So you would think Saul would choose to drop the beef by now. But no. See, Saul did apologize for trying to kill David, but of course he went right back to trying to murder him again right after. So David just ran away again, but this time he went to leave with the Philistines. After hearing this, Saul finally stopped trying to kill David, but that was only because he figured the Philistines would kill David themselves, since they hated him just as much as Saul did. Somehow though, David was able to convince the Philistines to let him live, but Saul was not aware of this. With David out of sight, you'd think Saul would go back to enjoying his life, but no, it was already too late for that. Saul had spent years with a broken mind fighting his own people, whether it was random priests, David, Samuel, or even Jonathan, his own son. Now the end was already knocking on the door for him. For the last time, the Philistines marched up and set up camp ready to invade Israel. The army sent shivers down Saul's spine, so he had to find out if God would still help him. He asked various priests to speak to God about his upcoming battle, but they all heard nothing. God wasn't speaking back. So in a last-ditch effort, Saul got a medium to help him speak with the ghost of Samuel. Once the ghost saw Saul, he rebuked him immediately. Saul started begging, but Samuel went on and told him he would not only lose this battle, but also die in it. Saul, after hearing this, fell into a deep sadness and could not eat. But no matter how sad he was, those Philly boys were still coming for him. And boy did they come. It was a slaughter right as the battle kicked off. Israelites ran away as Philistines butchered each man next to them. It didn't take long before Saul's 3 sons, including Jonathan, were killed, and then Saul himself was hit by an archer, gravely wounded by the arrow. While laying in the midst of his slaughtered men, Saul begged his armor-bearer to kill him before the Philistines could. The armor-bearer hesitated, so Saul immediately put his own sword through his torso, making sure no Philistine could claim the glory of killing Israel's first king. In the aftermath of the fight, the Philistines found his corpse and beheaded it, then attached his body to a wall in one of their cities. But thankfully, some Israelites stole it back and then cremated it back in their home. Saul's story, in my opinion, is the biggest downfall in the Bible. He had the honor of being Israel's first king, even if he was from the smallest tribe, and he was also a pretty great king too. Despite all that skill, he still fell to jealousy. He lost his allies either by killing them or chasing them away, and in the end, he dragged the ones that stood with him into a battle he knew he could not win, also they could die. This is the tragedy of Saul. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. There's many more videos on the channel discussing more Bible lore in detail, so please take a look.